I think it was somewhere in the Chiricahua Mountains, southeastern Arizona. I remember the dry heat clinging to everything, even as the road started climbing higher and the desert turned into forest. We were a few months into dating, me and my now husband, and for some reason we thought a camping trip with his friends just days after quitting smoking was a good idea. We'd both agreed to quit cold turkey less than a week earlier. It was already getting to me. My hands kept shaking, my chest felt tight, and I could feel that constant itch of agitation you get when you're trying to kick a habit that's buried deep in your brain. But we didn't cancel the trip. We packed the car anyway and started driving. The plan was simple. Meet up with a few of his buddies who were already out there, set up camp, and maybe go for a hike or two. I tried to keep my thoughts off everything by watching the scenery change, but it wasn't working. My nerves were wound so tight I ended up crying in the car. Not bawling, not loud, just tears sliding down quietly. My hands clenched in my lap while he kept driving like nothing was happening. I don't even think he noticed for a while, or maybe he just didn't know what to say. Honestly, I didn't either. I didn't want to ruin the trip, and I was too ashamed to say how scared I was. Not of the mountains or the camping, but of how much I wanted a cigarette. The road up into the mountains wasn't paved. It was mostly gravel and dirt, with huge ruts and potholes where rain had chewed through the surface. We were in his old sedan, something low to the ground and not built for rough driving. I was gripping the door handle, my stomach flipping every time we hit a bump. And then, about halfway to camp, it happened. We hit a pothole, deep, hidden in the shadow of a tree, and the whole front end of the car dropped and slammed. The car jolted so hard I heard something underneath scrape. A second later, everything went dead. No engine sound, no power steering, no lights on the dashboard. Just silence. We both just sat there for a second, stunned. The air felt thick, heavier than it had before. My first thought was that we'd just broken something important. Maybe the oil pan had cracked, or we'd busted the suspension. He tried turning the key, but nothing happened. Not even a click. The car was just off. We opened the manual, flipping through pages we didn't understand. It was useless. We were too far from a cell tower to get a signal, and we hadn't passed another car in a good 20 minutes. I started to panic. The tears came back, and I felt trapped in my own skin again. All I wanted in that moment was to light a cigarette, just something to give me a second to breathe. I asked him if he had any. He didn't. People started pulling over, one at a time. Most were friendly. They'd slow down, lean out the window, ask if we needed help. I kept saying the same thing. No, we're good. But do you have a cigarette? They never did. I'd wave them off, then immediately regret it, because maybe they could have helped if I'd let them. But I didn't want help, I wanted nicotine. Every sound made me jump. The birds, the engine sounds in the distance, even the wind in the trees. Eventually, one guy pointed out something in the manual that we'd missed. Apparently, there was a safety mechanism in the car that triggered if it thought it had been in a crash, to shut everything down. There was a reset procedure, and once we followed it, the engine came back to life. We were lucky. If that guy hadn't stopped and known what to look for, we might have been stuck for hours. By the time we pulled into the campsite clearing, I was done, completely drained. My emotions were fried, my body ached from the tension, and my head was pounding from withdrawal. The spot was beautiful. Sure. Tall trees, cool breeze, sunlight filtering through the branches. But all I wanted was to crawl into the tent and disappear. So while he went off with his friends to do whatever they do, hike, talk, drink, I stayed behind. I just needed to be alone. He helped set up the tent before heading off. It was one of those older dome tents, the kind that never seems to go up right the first time. We laid out our sleeping bags, tossed in a few bags of clothes, and he left me with some water and snacks in case I got hungry. I curled up inside without changing, my shoes still on, and tried to sleep. That's when it got worse. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the light had shifted. It was later in the day, maybe 2 hours before sunset, and everything had that golden orange hue you only get at high elevation. But something was off. I felt it before I saw it. That thick, prickling feeling across your skin, like being watched. I stayed completely still, listening. There was movement outside the tent. Not footsteps, more like a slow, steady rustle through dry grass and branches. I told myself it was nothing, just wind, maybe a squirrel or something, but it kept going. Something was definitely out there, and it was big. I could hear the weight of it pressing down with every step. Not fast, just slow and deliberate. I sat up quietly, my heart climbing into my throat. Then a shadow passed over the tent wall. It was massive, wide, tall, and unmistakably animal. Not a person. I felt my stomach flip. I knew there had been bear sightings in this area. We'd passed signs on the way up warning about it, how to store food, how to act if you encountered one. But none of it mattered now. I was alone, and there was something huge outside my thin nylon shelter. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I tried to remember what I was supposed to do. Don't make noise. Don't run. Make yourself big. Wait, no, that was for mountain lions. For bears. Play dead? I didn't know. My thoughts were scattered, and the sound outside the tent wasn't helping. Then I heard it huff. A loud, short exhale. Not a snort, not a growl, but something heavy. Then a slow shift, the sound of hooves or paws, dragging through dirt. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see what I was dealing with. I reached toward the corner of the tent where I'd left my glasses, but they weren't there. I realized I'd set them outside, near my boots, when I first came in. Everything was blurry without them, and I couldn't make out the shape of the thing outside. I made a decision. A stupid one, probably, but I was panicking. I figured if I made it to the car, I could lock the doors and wait. I knew the keys were still in my backpack, right next to the driver's seat. I reached slowly for the zipper, then paused. The shadow outside shifted again, and I froze, turned slightly. I saw the outline of something long swaying from behind it. A tail. Not a stubby one like a bear's, but long and swinging. That stopped me. Bears don't have tails like that. I sat there blinking, squinting, trying to make sense of it. The head was still big, the shoulders broad, but the movement was slow and lazy, not like a predator. I unzipped the tent a tiny bit and reached out. My fingers brushed the plastic frames of my glasses. I pulled them in and slid them on. My vision cleared and everything changed. It was a cow, a huge, dusty brown cow, just standing there outside the tent, flicking flies off its back with that long tail. Its ribs showed through its hide, and its eyes were dull, barely interested in me or the tent, just chewing, calm as anything. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for 10 minutes. My hands were still shaking, my chest heaving like I'd just run a mile. I laughed, not out of humor, but the kind of laugh that comes when your body doesn't know what else to do. After a few minutes, the cow wandered off, and I watched it push through the underbrush toward the trees. Apparently, this area wasn't just bear country. It was also open range for cattle. No fences, just wandering livestock in the middle of nowhere. Arizona is weird like that. The rest of the evening passed in a strange haze. When my boyfriend got back, I didn't tell him right away. I just sat by the fire, staring into the flames, trying to process the whole day. The car breaking down, the withdrawal, the panic, and now this. A cow. Eventually, I told him. He laughed a little, but I could tell he was also surprised. We moved our food into the car that night just in case. And I slept with my glasses on, one hand on the zipper, just in case something bigger than a cow came wandering by next time. We stayed for 2 nights. It wasn't all bad. Some parts were even nice. The stars were incredible. The air smelled like pine and dust. And in the quiet moments, I felt something settle inside me. Like maybe I could actually stick with quitting. Maybe I didn't need the crutch of smoking, even if my hands still shook and my head still pounded. But I never forgot that feeling. That sick, creeping fear that comes when you think you're alone in the woods with something dangerous. That panic, that helplessness, all sparked by a blur through a tent wall. It reminded me that nature doesn't care about your anxiety, your plans, your withdrawal symptoms. Out there, it's just you, your senses, and whatever moves through the trees. And sometimes it's just a cow. But next time, I told myself, I'd keep my glasses inside the tent. It happened years ago, but I can still feel it in my stomach when I think about it. Not a normal fear like the kind you get watching a horror movie. It's deeper than that. It's the kind of fear that sticks in your bones. The kind that makes your body go cold and your brain go empty. The kind that comes from knowing, really knowing you're completely powerless. We were hiking in a national park in Sarawak, Malaysia. I won't name it, not because it's a secret or anything, but because the park itself wasn't the scary part. It was beautiful. Towering trees, long twisting roots that reached across the trails, mist that sat low in the mornings and rolled away like a tide by noon. I remember the sounds: birds calling in high-pitched chirps, insects buzzing constantly, frogs croaking deep in the mud. It was the kind of place that makes you feel like you're on another planet. Everything is green, but not just one green, every shade you can imagine. The trail was damp, covered in fallen leaves, and even when it wasn't raining, the air felt wet. You sweat just from breathing. There were 6 of us on the hike, all part of a tour group. A couple from Australia, a solo traveler from Germany, me, and 2 guides, locals who knew the park like the backs of their hands. One was older, slower, more watchful. The other was younger, quick with a machete when we needed to clear low branches or when we brushed too close to fire ants. We weren't deep into the jungle, maybe a few kilometers in, following a trail that looped around a low ridge and passed by some of the tall fig trees orangutans liked. We hadn't seen much that morning. Some long-tailed macaques swinging high above, a hornbill in the distance, a couple of wild pigs crossing the trail. The guides were always scanning the trees. "You never know," they had said at the start. "Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't." The orangutans, that was what we all wanted to see. The wild ones. Not the ones in sanctuaries or rehab centers, actual free-living orangutans in the forest. You don't see them often. Even when they're near, they don't make much sound. They just move slowly through the trees, quiet and careful. They don't want to be seen. We were maybe 2 hours into the hike when it happened. The first thing I noticed was the silence. We had been walking single file down a slope, roots sticking out like traps, leaves slick underfoot. I was third in line. The guides were talking softly, pointing out trees, leaves, insects. Then the forest just stopped. No birds, no insects, nothing. Took a few seconds before I realized it. Then everyone noticed. We all slowed down, stopped walking. The air felt heavier. Still humid, still hot, but heavier. Like it wasn't moving anymore. Like something was pressing it down. I thought maybe a big cat was nearby. The guides had mentioned that sometimes sun bears and clouded leopards were in the area, but they were shy, rare, and usually far away from people. The lead guide slowly raised his hand. That meant stop. Don't move. Don't talk. We all froze. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I heard a crack. Not a snap, not a rustle. This was a crack like when someone breaks a thick tree branch. It came from up the slope, maybe 20 or 30 meters away. Not far. I squinted through the trees. That's when I saw him. He stepped out of the green, moving between 2 thick trunks, and stopped. Just stood there, watching. The alpha male orangutan. I didn't need to be told who he was. You could feel it. Massive orange-brown fur-covering arms as thick as a grown man's thighs. His face was wide and flat, dark-skinned, with huge cheek pads that almost looked like armor. His mouth was closed, but his jaw was enormous, jutting out slightly, giving his whole head a square shape. His body hung heavy, like gravity pulled harder on him than on anything else. He wasn't moving fast. He wasn't puffing himself up. He just stood there, but the stillness around him was like a warning, like the forest had agreed to step back and let him have the space. He didn't seem to notice us at first, or maybe he did but didn't care. He looked around, his head turning slowly, scanning the trail, the trees, the ridge. Then he looked straight at us. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. He stared for maybe 10 seconds. That doesn't sound like a long time, but out there, under the trees, in that heat, it felt like hours. I wasn't just scared. I was empty. My brain wasn't running through plans. I wasn't thinking of what to do. I wasn't thinking at all. I was just frozen. I don't think most people understand how strong those animals are. You see pictures, you hear stories. But when you're actually standing there, seeing one in the wild, knowing it chose to come out of the trees, it's something else. He wasn't walking with a troop. He wasn't passing through. He was doing something deliberate. The guides had said earlier that this specific alpha male, hadn't been seen on the trails in years. People had caught glimpses in the trees, far off. But he never came down. Not like this. He started moving again. Not toward us, thank God, but across the trail. Every step he took was silent, even with his size. He used his arms as much as his legs, knuckle walking like a gorilla, slow but powerful. His back shifted with every step, muscles moving like ropes under his fur. When he passed by a young tree, he pushed it aside like it was nothing. He didn't look at us again, just moved across the trail, paused at a low branch, and grabbed a fruit I hadn't even noticed, peeled it slowly, then dropped the skin and continued into the forest on the other side. He was visible the whole time, maybe 5 minutes total. Then the green swallowed him up again. Only after he was gone did I realize my shirt was soaked through. Not from sweat, though I was sweating too, but from standing so still for so long. Every muscle in my body had been locked up. My legs were numb. My jaw hurt. I'd been clenching it without knowing. The guides waited another full minute before they told us to move. They didn't whisper. They didn't crack jokes. They just gave a nod and started walking again. We didn't talk the rest of the hike. That night, back at the lodge, the story came out. Slowly, everyone told it a little differently. How big he looked, how quiet the forest got, how cold the air felt, how we all knew that if he'd wanted to, he could have closed the gap between us in seconds. No tree to climb would have helped. No path to run down. He wasn't a predator, no. But he didn't need to be. He had nothing to prove. He was beyond fear, beyond threat. He was the forest's fist, closed but ready. I went back to my room and lay on the bed, looking up at the ceiling fan, thinking about how easy it would have been for things to go wrong. What if someone had moved? What if someone had gasped or stepped forward to take a picture? What if he had seen it as a challenge? We were lucky. No, more than that. We were spared. That orangutan didn't care about us. He wasn't there to entertain. He wasn't there for a photo op. He came down because he wanted to, and we happened to be in his way. It's funny. I've been in a car accident. I've been caught in a rip current at sea. I've had a knife pulled on me during a mugging. But none of those scared me the way that moment did, because none of those made me feel so helpless. Out there in the forest, that creature was king. No gun, no siren, no phone call could change that. If he'd wanted to tear through us, nothing would have stopped him. But he didn't, and that's the scariest part of all, because I don't think he spared us out of kindness. I think we just weren't interesting enough. I never believed in curses, still don't, but I can say this. Sometimes the way things fall apart makes you think they're being pulled apart. You try to line up the reasons, the causes, the small chain of mistakes, but something always feels just a little off. That's what happened to me out there, and to my friend. It was 2 years ago in late summer. I had taken a few days off work, my first vacation in months, and planned to spend them up north, hiking through a patch of old forest land about 10 miles past the edge of the state park. A friend of mine, Nathan, had found it a few years earlier when he was into exploring old mining trails. He called it the Cut. Not a name on any map, just something he came up with. There was something about the land out there that looked sliced, like the trees and the rocks and the whole slope had been hewn off in chunks, not weathered over time, but ripped apart suddenly. Even the soil had that broken, unsettled look. He was the one who invited me on this trip, said he wanted to go back to the Cut one last time before the season changed. He was moving out of state for a new job, and this was kind of a send-off for himself. Just 2 guys, 2 backpacks, and 2 nights alone in the woods. Sounded good to me. The drive was about 6 hours. We parked near an old ranger station that hadn't been staffed in years. From there, it was another hour on foot. No trail markers, just the route Nathan remembered from before. He said he found the place by accident once, got turned around during a thunderstorm, and ended up sheltering in a shallow rock formation near the edge of a slope. That formation would be our base camp. It was tucked into the hillside with 3 tall boulders around it, like crude shelter walls. At its center was a flat patch of dirt just wide enough for 2 tents. I should say now, I wasn't paying close attention to the details that first day. I should have asked more questions when I noticed how clean the ground was, how empty it felt under the trees. No bugs buzzing, no birds calling out, just whined through the branches and the sound of our boots crunching over loose stones. There was something dry about the place. Not just the soil, but the air too, like everything had been drained a little too long ago. By late afternoon, we had the camp set. Nathan was in a good mood. He moved easily around the rocks, like he remembered every corner. I sat on a mossy slab near our fire ring, just watching the last sun pour in over the slope. That's when I noticed something poking out from under the dirt beside one of the rocks. It was a thick edge, like the corner of a box or a large book. At first I thought it was wood, rotted, maybe something from an old crate or trapper's supply left behind decades ago. But when I cleared the dirt off, I saw it was stone. Black stone, cold and sharp even in the late sun. I cleared more dirt. It wasn't very deep, maybe buried just beneath the surface by years of leaves and weather. The slab was rectangular, almost perfect, and heavy. I had to rock it side to side just to lift it. When I pulled it out and laid it flat, Nathan came over and knelt beside me. He didn't say anything, just looked at it, blinking. The thing was maybe 2 feet long and just under a foot wide. There were marks on it. Shallow carvings, lines, circles, maybe symbols. Faint but noticeable. They weren't letters, not that I could tell. Just shapes that didn't look random. Too precise for weather damage. Too deliberate to be a trick of erosion. I said something like, "Huh, that's weird," and brushed more dirt off. The stone was clean, no moss, no roots. It hadn't been there long. Or if it had, something had kept it preserved. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to keep it. I told myself it'd make a cool paperweight or maybe something to hang on to as a memory from the trip. That was my first real mistake. Nathan stared at the stone a while longer, then finally stood up and walked away. He didn't say much the rest of the night. I figured he was tired. The air that night was still, heavy. Even with the fire going, it felt like the woods were pressing in. I barely slept. I heard footsteps in the leaves, though every time I sat up and looked, I saw nothing, just shadows and cold light. The next morning, Nathan told me he wanted to cut the trip short. No real explanation. He just said he didn't feel right. Said we could stay one more night, but then he was heading back early. I shrugged it off. Sometimes the woods do that to people. The quiet gets under your skin. I felt it before, but this was different. He didn't look spooked. He looked off, like something inside him had tilted just slightly out of place. I should have left with him then. That second day, I kept the stone near me. I didn't know why. I even wrapped it in one of my t-shirts and stashed it inside my tent, as if it was something fragile. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I'd look it up when I got back, try to figure out what the markings meant. But part of me already knew there wouldn't be anything to find. It was old, older than books, older than explanations. Nathan barely ate that day. He kept pacing around the edges of camp. Every so often he'd stop and stare at the spot where I'd found the stone. Not at the stone itself, just at the ground, like he was trying to remember something, or forget it. That night, I woke to the sound of something heavy being dragged. I sat up fast, heart hammering. The moon was bright enough that I could see across the camp without a flashlight. My tent flap was partly unzipped, and through the opening I saw Nathan, standing over the fire ring with something in his hands. He was holding the stone. I watched as he carried it back to the spot where I'd found it. He knelt there for a while, digging with his hands. Then he placed the slab down and started covering it up again. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just lay there, frozen. When he was done, he stood up and stared at the ground for a long time. Then he turned and walked away from camp. He didn't come back. I waited until sunrise. Then I followed his tracks. They led straight down the slope and into a narrow ravine. At the bottom, I found his pack torn open, his flashlight cracked in half, a few dark stains on the rocks that didn't smell like dirt. I kept looking for hours. Nothing. No sign of him. No sound. Just wind, moving faster now, like the forest was breathing. I made it back to camp around noon, shaking and tired. The fire pit was cold. My tent was still zipped. The stone was inside again. I left it. I packed everything I could carry and hiked out. Didn't stop to eat. Didn't stop to think. I made it back to the car by nightfall and drove until the tank was almost empty. I didn't sleep that night either. I didn't call the Rangers. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Just said Nathan went missing, got turned around, probably tried to find the road and didn't make it. It happens more than you think. But the truth is, I don't think Nathan got lost. I think he knew exactly where he was going. I don't believe in curses, but I believe in guilt. I believe in greed. I believe in obsession. I think the stone wasn't cursed at all. I think it was bait. Something someone carved a long time ago to be noticed. Something that shouldn't be moved. A warning, maybe, or a marker, or a seal. Nathan must have known it. Maybe not the first time he came here, but when he saw me digging it up, something changed in him. He remembered, and maybe he figured if I wasn't going to return the slab, someone had to. Someone always has to. I never went back, never tried to find the spot again. I don't even look at maps of the area anymore, but sometimes I dream about it. The stone, the marks, the way it felt cold even in the sun. And I remember the look on Nathan's face as he walked away, like he knew exactly what he was doing. Not cursed, just paying a debt, and making sure I never forgot. I didn't grow up with fairy tales. I grew up with stories my mother told me in the dark, after the candles were blown out but before we fell asleep. She never sugarcoated them. No dragons or princesses in towers. Just the kind of stories that leave a cold feeling in your chest, even years later. The kind you don't forget. She had one story in particular she used to tell when we were camping. It always came out late at night, when the fire had burned low and the woods around us felt too quiet. I hadn't thought about that story in years, until this past fall. It was October. The trees were shedding fast, and I'd been feeling worn out from work and life. I decided to take a weekend up north and get away from everything. I found a spot deep in the state forest, somewhere off the main trails, not marked by signs or maps. Just a clearing I'd been to once before. I brought my gear, enough food for 3 days, a lantern, and a book. I didn't bring my phone. I wanted it to be like it used to be when I was younger. Just me, the woods, and the quiet. The first day went fine. I hiked in about 3 miles, set up my tent under a group of birch trees, and made a small fire. The air had that early autumn bite, but I had layers and a good sleeping bag. I cooked a bit of stew from a pouch, stared at the fire for a while, and went to bed early. That night, I woke up just after midnight. Something about the woods always does that to me. I heard the leaves moving outside, the wind through the branches. I listened, alert, but nothing stood out, just the usual forest sounds. I rolled over and tried to sleep again, but my mind started turning. And that's when I thought of the story my mother used to tell. The one about the golden arm. Came back in pieces at first. A man marrying a rich girl. A gold prosthetic. Greed. Deception. Murder. A body in a coffin. A man stealing from the dead. The line whispered in the dark. Where's my golden arm? I lay there for a long time thinking about it. Not the ghost story version, though. Not the spooky stuff. I started thinking about how it would really go down, if it actually happened. If someone really killed for money. If someone really stole something like that. I thought about how stories get passed down and changed, twisted into legends. And I started wondering if maybe it hadn't been a ghost at all. The next morning, I woke with the story still on my mind. I made coffee over the fire and sat staring into the woods, the whole tale running through my head again and again. I could almost hear my mom's voice, calm and steady, telling it like she used to, but it felt different now. I was older. I'd seen more of the world. I'd seen what people are really like when they want something badly enough. I don't know why I did it, but I opened my journal and started writing the story out. Not the ghost version, not the fairy tale, just how I thought it would have happened in real life. This is what I wrote. Started with greed, not love. A man who wanted wealth, power, a name that meant something. He wasn't poor, not exactly, but he was nothing special. The kind of man who always felt like he deserved more than what he had. So when he heard about the merchant's daughter, he saw a way up. The merchant was old money. Not flashy, not loud, just steady, quiet, respected. He had 3 daughters. 2 were already married off to men with connections, men who could keep the business alive. But the youngest daughter, she was still unmarried. People whispered it was because of her arm. She had lost it in some kind of accident when she was a child. No one knew exactly what happened. Her father had paid a craftsman, a brilliant one, to forge her a new arm. Not from wood or iron like most prosthetics back then. No, this one was made of solid gold. A marvel of metalwork. Not practical, but beautiful. Something that showed the family's wealth every time she moved. The man saw her and saw money. That's all. He courted her carefully. Slow, patient, pretending. He smiled when she spoke. Brought her flowers. Walked with her in the gardens. Told her she was brilliant. Beautiful. Oh, she believed him. She had never known love from someone outside her family. And here was a man looking at her like she wasn't broken. He made her feel safe. And so, she loved him. They married. The father approved. The man was brought into the business, given a share. The house grew larger. His clothes changed. His friends did too. He had what he wanted. And with that, his patience wore thin. He started to drift. Gave her expensive gifts to make up for his absence. Came home late, ate meals without speaking. She noticed, of course. She asked. She accused. He didn't bother to lie anymore. He told her the truth, cold and simple. He married her for the money. She didn't matter now. She screamed, said she'd tell her father, said he'd lose everything. And just like that, his future was at risk again. He followed her as she stormed through the house, down the stairs to the cellar. Her footsteps were fast and angry. His were quiet. She turned at the bottom to shout something back at him, maybe a final warning. And he pushed her. She fell hard, neck twisted on the stone steps. The golden arm clanged against the floor. He waited a moment, then another. No movement, no breath. And then he wept. He called for help. He played the grieving husband, told the father it was an accident, that she fell, that he'd never recover from the loss. The father believed him, or maybe wanted to. She was his youngest, his favorite. The funeral was held the next day, and that night, alone with her casket, the man opened it. Not to say goodbye, but to take what he believed was still his. He brought a saw, cut clean through the joint where gold met skin. He wrapped the arm in cloth and left the rest behind. Back in the bedroom, he placed it under his pillow, too paranoid to let it out of sight until he could melt it down. He laid there, silent, eyes open in the dark, hand resting on the hidden prize beneath his head. He thought about the fire, about the bars of gold that would come from it, about how no one would ever know. But what he didn't think about was this. Someone else knew. Maybe not the ghost of a wronged woman. Maybe not a whisper on the wind. Maybe not a cold hand in the night. But someone had seen him at the funeral. Someone had followed him into the room. Maybe a servant. Maybe a friend. Maybe someone who knew about the fortune and the arm and what it would be worth. Someone who waited. That night, when the man finally slept, someone came for the arm. They didn't knock. They didn't shout. They came in quiet, like he had come down the cellar stairs. Quiet and with purpose. They took the arm back, not to return it to the dead, but to keep it for themselves. And they killed the man while he slept. Strangled him with the very arm he had stolen. Not because of justice or revenge, but because gold is gold, and greed is greed. I stopped writing there, closed the journal. The fire was low. The sky was gray. I had a strange feeling in my chest, like I wasn't alone, even though I knew I was. It wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was just people, real people, what they're capable of, what they'll do when no one is watching. That night I couldn't sleep. I heard movement outside the tent. Maybe a deer, maybe the wind, but I stayed still. I didn't breathe too loud. My hand found the small hatchet I kept near the flap. I kept thinking about the man in the story, how sure he must have felt, how proud, how safe, and how easy it is to be wrong. When morning came, I packed up fast. No coffee, no breakfast. I hiked out without looking back. I didn't see anyone. No one followed. Nothing happened. But I still felt it. That weight, that knowledge. Stories aren't just stories. They come from somewhere. And behind every ghost tale, there's something real. Something worse than a monster. Person. That's the last time I went camping alone. I still go sometimes, but only with friends. And I never tell that story out loud. Not anymore. Not even around the fire. Some things feel too close, too real. And I don't like remembering that night. How quiet it was. How it felt like someone might be watching. Just like he had. All those years ago. Thinking no one would ever know what he had done. Thinking he was safe. Thinking wrong. I always had trouble sleeping through the night. For as long as I can remember, I'd wake up sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning. Sometimes it was a noise. Sometimes it was just my body jolting me awake for no reason. I used to hate it. I'd lay there, staring up into the dark, listening to the sounds of the house, my heart racing over nothing. But things got better when I got my dog, Scout. Scout was a black lab, big, gentle, quiet. He had these warm, patient eyes and this heavy, calm breath when he slept. When I brought him home from the shelter, he followed me everywhere for weeks. Always wanted to be near me, especially at night. That first night I had him, I woke up like usual, nervous and unsettled. I put my hand over the edge of the bed just out of habit, and he licked it once. Just a soft, slow swipe of his tongue against my fingers. I almost cried from the relief. It was like he was saying, "I'm here. You're okay now." I fell asleep again in minutes. From that night on, it became a routine. Every time I woke up in the dark, I'd reach out. He'd lick my hand. I'd feel safe and I'd fall back asleep. I didn't even think about it after a while. It just became part of how I lived. Last fall, I went on a solo camping trip. I had been planning it for a while. I wanted to get out into the woods, disconnect, clear my head a little. I chose a spot up north, in a forest preserve near a small lake. It wasn't a popular site, which was what I liked about it. Fewer people meant more quiet, more room to breathe. I took Scout with me, of course. He loved being outside. I brought a 2-person tent, some gear, and enough food for 4 days. I left my phone in the car. I didn't want it buzzing in my pocket the whole time. I wanted this to be real solitude. The first day was quiet and uneventful. I got there in the afternoon, set up my tent in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, and took Scout for a walk down to the lake. He sniffed around, drank from the water, rolled in some leaves. I started a fire when the sun went down, made a can of chili, and shared some of it with Scout. After dinner, I sat by the fire and listened to the wind moving through the trees, the fire cracking and popping. Scout lay next to me with his head on his paws, eyes half closed. I felt calm, peaceful, maybe more than I had in years. That night, it got cold fast. The fire died out quicker than I expected. I zipped myself into the sleeping bag and Scout curled up on the floor of the tent next to me. I woke up sometime after 2. No sound, just my body waking up like it always did. I reached out, sleepy, half aware. His tongue touched my fingers. Soft, slow. I smiled to myself and drifted back into sleep. The next morning, we went on a long hike. I followed a narrow trail through the woods, just me and Scout. I saw deer prints, a raccoon near the water. We were deep enough in that the only sounds were birds, leaves moving in the wind, and our footsteps on the dirt path. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. We walked for hours. Back at the tent, I made another fire and cooked up some freeze-dried rice and beans. Scout ate the rest of the leftover chili. It went like that for 2 more days. Walking, eating, resting. The nights were cold, but Scout kept close. I kept waking up, always between 2 and 3. Always the same. I'd reach out, he'd lick my hand, and I'd sleep again. On the last night, something felt off. The day had gone normally, Another long walk, some reading, writing a few notes in a small journal I brought. But when night came, I started to feel a kind of tension I couldn't explain. I thought maybe I was just nervous about packing up the next morning. The wind was a little stronger, and I thought I heard something in the woods. A snapping branch, something moving fast and low. But when I looked, nothing was there. Probably a squirrel, maybe a raccoon. But still, something didn't sit right. I made a fire, but it didn't warm me the way it had the other nights. I felt exposed, like someone was standing behind me, just out of view. I kept checking over my shoulder. Scout noticed it too. His ears were up, his body tense. He kept looking into the trees and letting out low, quiet growls. I talked to him softly, trying to calm him down, even though I felt just as uneasy. When I finally got into the tent, I zipped it up tight. Scout lay beside me like always, close enough I could feel his warmth. I stayed awake longer than usual, listening. I didn't hear anything but the wind, but still I couldn't relax. Eventually, my body took over. My eyes closed. I drifted off. Then I woke up. It was dark, really dark, colder than the other nights. The kind of cold that slips into your bones and makes your teeth ache. I lay still, trying to figure out why I had woken up. I didn't hear anything at first, just silence. No wind, no owls, no rustling leaves, just this stillness. Then something scraped lightly against the side of the tent. Just once. Faint, dry sound, like nails over nylon. I held my breath, heart pounding. Then silence again. I reached out. Scout licked my hand. The moment his tongue touched me, I felt my body go soft with relief. My breath slowed. My heart settled. I kept my hand there for a moment, just resting. Then I pulled it back in and let sleep take me again. The next time I opened my eyes, the sun was already up. The inside of the tent was glowing with that soft orange light that comes through canvas. I felt groggy, a little cold, and stiff from sleeping on the ground. I turned over to reach for Scout. He didn't move. I sat up fast. He was lying on his side near the flap of the tent. At first, I thought he was asleep, but his body was too still, too flat. His eyes were open, his mouth too. There was blood on the floor of the tent, a lot of it. I stared, not breathing. Then I scrambled forward, calling his name in my head. Even though no sound came out of my mouth, I touched his fur. It was cold. Dicky. He wasn't breathing. His neck, his throat had been cut. A deep, clean cut, straight across. There was blood soaked into the tent floor beneath him, soaked into the edge of my sleeping bag. I started shaking. Then I looked up. There was something written on the tent wall above my head. It was messy, big letters, the kind you make with fingers, not a pen, written in red. I didn't want to believe it was blood, but I knew. Deep down, I already knew. The message said, "Humans can lick too." I sat there for a long time, frozen. My skin was crawling. My throat hurt from how tight it felt. I kept staring at the words, over and over. My hand felt warm and wet, like I could still feel the tongue against my fingers. But it hadn't been Scout. It hadn't been my dog. I unzipped the tent, got outside, and looked around. Everything was normal. Trees, grass, my fire pit. Nothing was out of place. No signs of anything. No footprints. No broken branches. No trail. Whoever had done it was already gone. I wrapped Scout's body in a blanket from my pack. I didn't leave him there. Couldn't. I carried him all the way back to the car. Took hours. My legs ached. My back burned. But I didn't stop. I drove to the nearest town and called the police. Told them everything. Showed them the tent. Gave them my journal. They asked 100 questions. I didn't have answers. I hadn't heard anything. I didn't see anyone. They said they'd investigate, but I could tell from the way they talked that they didn't expect to find anything. They never did. There was no evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no footprints. Nothing but a dead dog and a message that someone thought was clever. Someone had been out there. Someone had been watching me. Someone had come into my tent in the night, killed my dog, and licked my fingers pretending to be him. They had stood there in the dark, inches away from me, watching me sleep, maybe even smiling while they did it. I didn't go home after that. Not right away. I stayed with my sister for a while. She didn't ask questions, which I appreciated. Couldn't sleep. Not really. Even in a locked house with people nearby, I kept waking up. But this time, I didn't reach out. Couldn't. That feeling of something warm against my fingers, what used to be comfort, had turned into something else. Something I couldn't forget. Sometimes I still feel it. Even now, all this time later, my hand will twitch in the night, and I'll remember that night in the tent. I got a new dog eventually, a rescue again, smaller than Scout, a quiet little mutt with sharp eyes. I sleep with the door locked, a bat under the bed, and lights on in the hallway. I have cameras around the house, motion sensors, alarms. I live in the city now, not in the woods. Too many people for someone to sneak around unseen. That's the idea anyway. I don't go camping anymore. I don't sleep in tents. I don't sleep in silence. I keep a white noise machine running all night. It covers the sounds of the house, of